Welcome to Markets Now. I'm Michelle Rook along with Brian Grady, editor of Pro Farmer. Livestock mostly higher on Friday, but grains were mixed, and that was following the Pro Farmer Crop Tour and Pro Farmer Crop Estimates. And Brian, let's talk first of all about corn. Let's get into a little bit of the numbers here. You did drop yield about 3 bushels per acre on corn, and talk about why you did that.
Yeah, so just a really poor finish, or what we anticipate will be a poor finish, especially in the Western Corn Belt because of the extreme heat. So that came on top of moisture stress that many of those areas already faced, and it really kicked the crop in the teeth, so to speak. Pushing it hard to the finish line. Some of those fields have already given up and decided this is the end of the growing season, and much too early. We shouldn't be having this conversation in the third week of August in a normal crop year, and this has been anything but normal. We saw extreme variability as we went across the Corn Belt, even within individual fields. We saw all kinds of impacts from the crazy weather that we had. Some guys ended up with late plantings out in the Eastern Corn Belt, and then they had uneven emergence, which led to uneven pollination, which led to that variability within the fields. And so we saw that. Now, there's some very good corn in Ohio. I was most impressed with the Ohio corn crop of any of them that I sampled. Indiana is expected. USDA had a record yield for corn in Indiana. We didn't see as good a corn in Indiana. Actually, our crop tour yield, which is different than the Pro Farmer yield, but the crop tour yield came in lower for Indiana than it did for Ohio. Illinois, big crop, but it's not going to be as big as last year's record because of the extreme variability. And fortunately for the Illinois guys, they built in a pretty big yield before that heat wave came through. And so that should allow them to hold on. Iowa, there's issues in Iowa and the crop shutting down early. Minnesota, there's quite a few issues in Minnesota as well, especially in south central and southeastern portions of the state. South Dakota, big rebound from last year, but probably no better than normal and maybe even a little bit below normal. And then Nebraska, boy, the heat really hit that crop hard, especially the dry land crop. Irrigated crop, it'll probably be able to hold on because they can put water on it. But the dry land is really going to be an issue because of that heat last week.
Production falling under 15 billion bushels, but does that get us under 2 billion bushels ending stocks?
Well, so we had cushion on corn, so we could probably lose 80 million, 100 million bushels, and it probably doesn't have a whole lot of market impact, to be honest with you, for corn. So there was some corn there. That's different than soybeans, and we'll talk about that later. But we feel like just from a supply and demand perspective, I don't think these numbers are going to have too much of an impact. Now, keep in mind, we increased our harvested acreage by 675,000 acres based on FSA certified acreage as of August. And so some of that acreage increase offset the yield reduction as well. And so we probably aren't losing as many bushels because of that as what it would have been if it was just a straight yield reduction.
On soybeans, Pro Farmer cut yield a little over a bushel per acre. We don't have a lot of wiggle room in that crop. So what does this do to ending stocks? Do we get below 200 million, Brian?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, not much cushion on the soybean side of things. So when you start to whittle off on the yield, it has potential game-changing implications for the soybean market. And I think that when you look at the balance sheets now for 2023, 24, if you plug in our production numbers for both corn and soybeans, the impact is much greater on soybeans than what it is on corn. We'll see. You still have a long time to go, and we still have a long time until harvest, and things can change. But as we sit here today with our production estimates, definitely the bigger impact is to the soybean balance sheet.
Do you think that the number's going to get smaller from here just because, again, this late season heat?
Well, kind of same story. Some of the states, yes. Minnesota is at risk, really low potted soybean crop in Minnesota. Iowa, many of the fields are already turning in the third week of August. That's not normal. Nebraska has issues. And so those states primarily, and those are three big producers, obviously, of soybeans. And they have issues. You go into the Eastern Corn Belt and very heavily potted crop in Illinois and Indiana and Ohio. And Illinois is more mature, the most mature of those three crops, and so it probably has the best chance to hold on to its yield potential and maybe add a little bit, depending on late season weather after this heat wave moved through. Indiana, a little less mature than what Illinois was. So it's going to need time and some late season rains. And then Ohio, heavily potted crop in Ohio, but they were flat pods that in many cases. And so they're going to need a rain. Now they got a rain that came through portions of the state after we left on crop tour. So that'll help. And they had a decent soil moisture profile when we did come through. So from a moisture perspective, they're fine. They're just going to need some time to finish. And if they do, it's going to be a big bean crop in Ohio this year.
Is this enough to get us over, the $14 mark? Because we kind of ran up into some chart resistance late this week on the November beans.
It might be, on the surface, the market has to determine what fair value is. And part of that equation is the demand side of things. And so we're still trying to play catch up on the new crop sales. Brazil produced a record crop, and they're going to be exporting some of that record crop still into our export space, so to speak, when the new crop marketing year starts. So I do have some concerns on the demand side of things, but demand for soybeans is better than it is for corn. I think we do tighten up the balance sheet, and the question then becomes, how much price supportive is that?
So let's talk about some of the, I guess, biggest surprises that you had on the tour. Ohio was kind of the shining star over in the eastern part of the tour, wasn't it?
Yeah. So just apples for apples, meaning what they normally would produce and grow in terms of crop. I was most impressed with the Ohio corn crop. It was stellar, and that hasn't always been the case. Ohio has really improved their plant populations. They really improved on their building yields and those types of things over the years. And boy, that Ohio corn crop did not look like a typical Ohio corn crop. It looked more like an Indiana crop. And it's going to be big yielding unless something happens into the end of the growing season from a weather perspective that's really negative. So that was my one big takeaway. The other big takeaway was Minnesota soybeans, just a really low potted crop in Minnesota. As a matter of fact, it was the only one of the 7 states that we were sampled from in crop tour that was down year over year in terms of pods. And so that unto itself is shocking. But also the pod counts in a 3x3 square that we calculated on crop tour were the lowest of any state in Minnesota. And so that was my second big takeaway from the week.
I'm going to add on to that because I was on the western leg of the tour and we were following the scouts, and they were, counting a lot of 1 and 2 bean pods. And so that's also going to be a negative on top of what you just said, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's some of the observation that we make. So the crop tour data they're instructed to count pods. But they can make notes. And so if you have fewer pods and the number of beans within the pods is reduced, it even reduces your yield factor even more. And so that does come into play. And that's part of the analysis that Pro Farmer puts on it when we release our crop estimates on Friday versus the crop tour data that was Monday through Thursday.
Yeah, maybe explain for folks why you guys we have state-by-state estimates from the crop tour, and then we have state-by-state estimates from Pro Farmer. And what's the difference, and why is there a difference?
Yeah, so the crop tour data Monday through Thursday was pure raw data. We go into fields, pull samples, calculate them, put them into our spreadsheets, and create the averages. And so that is 100% raw data. The Pro Farmer estimates released at 1:30 Central Time on Friday were the crop tour data plus a whole lot of other factors, how we thought the crop was going to finish, weather, looking forward, acreage adjustments, which I told you we made on corn and didn't make on soybeans based on the FSA certified acreage data, and a multitude of factors, areas outside of the crop tour. So we cover about 2/3 of U.S. corn and soybean acreage. with crop tour. That leaves a third outside of that area. So we do factor that into the numbers. And that's the real difference, is that one is raw data and the other one's the raw data plus a bunch of other factors, including analysis. And one is crop tour and the other one is a pro farmer estimate.
So I got to ask you as well, we had all this heat this week and it looks like beans maybe put in a little weather premium up about 34 cents for the week while corn was down a nickel. Have you been surprised that the corn market has kind of, ignored some of this heat, or are we just far enough along that the trade feels like it's already worked in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know what the market's thinking, to be honest with you, but my perception is that they'll wait and see. They're probably going to wait and see what USDA does with its September estimate and then judge accordingly. But, it really comes back to the part that I talked about earlier. Corn has cushion and soybeans doesn't have cushion. And as a result, the soybean market has to be more responsive.
Well, thanks for joining us and congratulations on another great tour. Brian Grady joining us with Pro Farmer, and that's Markets Now.